mindful of everybody's time. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We are going to be talking about the COVID impact on traffic for today's DLZ webinar. DLZ is doing these webinars about once a month, so if you are interested in any future topics, please make sure you're watching your email for those announcements. So today's presentation is given by myself. My name is Cynthia Peck, and by Chuck Fawcett. So I have been working with DLZ for about 17 years. I started my career with the Missouri Department of Transportation after graduating from Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. So my major responsibilities with DLZ have included roadway and traffic engineering projects. I've project managed both urban and local, and I've done many different studies and designs for signals and traffic. Chuck Fawcett has been working in the industry for about 20 years after graduating from the University of Akron. And his focus has been primarily on traffic engineering and analysis, including data collection, modeling, simulation. He has done work on studies and on signal timings and optimization of systems, and also traffic signals involved in construction staging. So we will be your speakers today. I also do want to remind you throughout the presentation, I would encourage you to enter questions into the question and answer pod. So you're going to see on your bottom of your screen probably an indication for Q&A. And we would like you to enter your questions there. It's just easier for us to keep track of them in that pod rather than the chat pod. So if you could please go ahead and use that Q&A pod, and I'll give you reminders throughout the presentation so that hopefully we will get questions as we go and you won't forget them. So why are we here today? Transportation engineering work requires the use of traffic data. The best solution to any transportation problem is always the one that fits the users and the amount of traffic that will be using it. So it is important for us to have accurate data. And what we're going to talk about today is the challenge that has occurred with the pandemic and the large change in traffic volumes that have happened because of it. And we're going to talk a little bit about how the transportation industry is addressing this. So before we go any further, I'd like to do a little poll to kind of see who we have here today. So the first question for my poll is, what is your primary job function? So you should see that poll in the middle of your screen right now. So if you could go ahead and put an answer in. And I see that we're already getting lots and lots of votes or answers. Wow, this is great. We have really great participation. People are paying attention so far, Chuck. Okay, so I see that we have a lot of others. So if maybe you could go ahead, if you responded other, maybe you can enter in the chat box what your primary job function is, since we do have over 30% that did respond that way, just to give us a little better idea of who we have here. So the next poll I am going to share with you is going to be, who is your employer? So if you could go ahead and answer this next question. Okay, well, it looks like we have about 65% private, about 27% local, and 5% state. So thank you everybody for joining us today, and thanks for going and replying to our polls there. So What are our objectives for today? Our objectives for today are to discuss the COVID impacts on traffic, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to specifically talk about impacts in Ohio and then also impacts in Illinois, which are two geographic areas where DLZ is located and does a lot of work. So we're going to address those specifically. Then we're going to talk about why traffic data is required and strategies we use to determine what traffic data to use. Chuck is going to go over a specific case study about how we have used traffic data during COVID and how we've determined exactly what data to use. And then we're going to talk about what we're going to do moving forward and how we're going to address the issue of traffic data, how we're going to forecast it and how we're going to attain it. So just to get some terms under our belt so that we're all on the same page and we all know how we're referring to things, what we're discussing. Vehicle miles traveled. That's what I'm going to be using to talk about how we compare traffic today to traffic from March 2020 to traffic from December of 2019, so that we can talk about vehicle miles traveled being kind of our baseline of February 2020. So February 2020 is before the pandemic, and then comparing traffic along different points in our venture to that data point. Also, classification. When we talk about the types of vehicles, there is a difference, especially as I show the data, you'll see between passenger vehicles and commercial vehicles. Sometimes there has even been a difference throughout the pandemic of long haul freight versus local freight. So we'll be talking a little bit about those different things as well. So the impact of COVID on traffic. So an overview of data for the entire United States. When we're talking about traffic in the US and we're talking about that baseline of 2020, then we're moving towards March 2020. So as we entered the pandemic, there were stay-at-home orders brought by different states, and those began generally in mid-March. By April 1st, 38 states in the United States had some form of stay-at-home order. So when we start to look at the traffic numbers, that is what fueled some of these changes in traffic volumes. So the data I'm about to show you for the United States is based on a sampling of about 13% of the traffic in the United States, and that's kind of then used to cover the entire United States. So traffic volumes in April of 2020, after most of the stay-at-home orders had come into effect, you can see here 30 to 60% of what the February volumes were. And then as the pandemic went on, as things opened back up, as the COVID numbers dropped, then traffic increased. So let's go ahead and look at some of those charts. So this screen shows you three different charts, and the three different charts here show three different views kind of the pandemic and traffic volumes. In the lower left-hand corner, this is an international traffic data chart. And what that shows you is a slightly different picture of the traffic data that is international rather than just specifically domestic United States. So you can see on the left-hand side of that chart, those are the numbers from the very beginning of March. So really before it took hold and before traffic patterns changed. And then you can see the large dip that happened in April, May. And then as different countries rebounded and started to get back out and actually travel places, you can see how it rebounded to about 85% of normal. In some countries, the red line is Moscow, and then you've got other data points there, and you can see how it was different for different locations across the international spectrum. On the right-hand side of the screen, you're going to see on the top, you'll see Ohio, ODOT, it's ODOT data, and on the bottom, you'll see data from Chicago. So you can see how that data is a bit different. So you can see where it was at the left-hand side, the very beginning, right before the pandemic really changed traffic. And then as you progress to the right, you can see some interesting things happening because truck traffic, combination trucks and single unit trucks, in some respects, started rebounding more quickly, and then even got to the point where it was more traffic in those particular categories than it was pre-pandemic. And some of that has to do, we know now, with the way we shop and how that changed and how the truck traffic changed because of it. So as we move forward, we're going to review specific to Ohio what this meant. And here we have a timeline of what happened here in Ohio, when the first case was diagnosed, when our governor declared a state of emergency, when our governor made a statewide mandate to close the schools, and then a little bit of information about cases on a specific date of March 23rd, and then the fact that a stay-at-home order was issued in late March. And so you can see that our traffic data follows that information. Whereas in late February, our traffic is at the 0 point, then we dip down. Our lowest was in April. And then as we came back up, coming out of it in the summer of 2020, when our COVID numbers were low, traffic came back up. Now this has varied as we've moved through the pandemic. As the numbers go up and things shut down, our traffic volumes reflect that. And another way to look at this data is by TSMO incidents, and this information is available on the TSMO site for ODOT. And these incidents are where the Freeway Safety Patrol is called, and they react to an incident that they're called to. So you have different types here. You have by vehicle type, the heavy commercial, non-vehicle, passenger. And when we talk about non-vehicular incidents for this, what we're talking about is possibly a pedestrian on the roadway, a dead animal that they're asked to remove, debris, medical emergency. So these are some of the TSMO incidents. And we can see that there was a very large dip in April and May in reporting and responding to incidents on our roadways. And then it's rebounded in July and then dipped again in November and December, and it's coming back up now here in April. So you can see almost a reaction to peaks in COVID numbers as we move through the pandemic. So here in Ohio, we have about 50% of our roadway projects are funded through fuel tax. So when we're talking about traffic numbers and volumes being severely reduced, we're also talking about funding issues. So just wanted to give a quick overview here of Ohio's possible funding issue. User taxes, fuel tax, motor vehicle tax, like I said, over 50% of our funding comes from these. The Ohio Turnpike released information about fuel sold on the Turnpike between March 2020 and September 2020. And you can see here that there were over 1 million fewer gallons of fuel sold in March of 2020. And then in April of 2020, there were a total of 2,800,000 less gallons of fuel sold. And then as we moved through the pandemic, by September, it was about 400,000 gallons less than typically seen in their fuel sales. And this is just on the Turnpike, something to keep in mind. How does that translate into dollars? Well, here in Ohio, the gas tax is 47 cents per gallon of diesel and 38.5 cents per gallon of gasoline. So directly translated into dollars, what that means is the loss in revenue was somewhere between 462,000 and 564,000 for March 2020 alone. So the blue line there is what it would have been if it was all gas. The orange line is what it would have been if it was all diesel. They didn't specify which, so it's somewhere in between those two lines. So what we're talking about here, the total between March and September 2020 for fuel sold on the turnpike alone is a loss somewhere between $4 million and $4,888,000. So when you compare that to Ohio overall, or project that to Ohio overall, in May 2020, there were reports that fuel sales were down more than 50% statewide. And with tax revenue being about $1.2 billion for the fiscal year that ended July 2019, 50% of our fuel tax not being collected is a pretty hefty impact to funding for projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Chuck.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to continue talking about what traffic volumes have looked like over the past year by talking about some observations we've made in Illinois. You know, a lot of the data that Cindy was talking about is based on a lot of the traffic volume data is based on continuous count stations, which are typically located on interstates or major like regional arterials. But last year for one of our projects, we counted 24-hour counts on about 4,000 locations on local roads in Illinois between May and November. And we wanted to take a look at that data and see if we were seeing the same types of reductions that we were talking about earlier. So we did a very simple analysis with that data. We took the 24-hour counts that we collected and applied an adjustment factor based on the month and day of the week that the data was collected on to estimate an ADT, and compared that to the ADTs that were established for those locations in prior years. And what we found was when we started collecting that data in May, that it was down significantly, over almost 25% from what we would expect typically. But then over the summer, we see that it was actually increasing more than prior years on these local roadways to almost 10% above what we would expect in July there. And then obviously, as you can see from the chart, dipped back down to less than what we had experienced in prior years at these locations once we got into the fall. The increase in the summer was a little surprising, but one theory is that at least in Illinois, we were coming out of kind of lockdown situations in the spring. So things were opening back up in the summer, but it wasn't a typical summer. People weren't able to go on vacation or not willing to, whether that's by air or by long road trips. So we think, people were staying closer to home, so they're out more than they were in the spring, obviously, but staying closer to home. So we think that's why we were seeing kind of higher volumes than we had seen previously on these local roadways. And then obviously in the fall, kids are going back to school, but it's still largely remote schooling. So we don't see the parents driving kids to school, and people are still working from home. We had another surge in the virus in the fall and more lockdowns that were put in place in November. So then we see those volumes go back down in the fall. Now, over these next few slides, I wanted to talk about how all this disruption in traffic data has been affecting our work. We need accurate traffic data to do a lot of the work that we do, traffic impact studies, intersection design studies, everything down to transportation planning and crash and safety studies. So with all this weirdness going on with traffic, we in the industry have been trying to move forward with our projects and not being able to collect what would normally be considered typical traffic data. So, you know, a lot of state DOTs have come out with policies on how to do this. And, you know, outside of having a policy, we've been working with our clients and our public agency partners on developing methodologies for how to move these projects forward. And a lot of it revolves around looking at historical traffic data, gathering data to look at what trends were prior to the pandemic and kind of using that to estimate what traffic volumes in 2020 would have been without the pandemic to use in our studies. And here I'm just talking about you know, some of the general sources of that data, whether it's ADT information from state, DOT and MPO websites, or if we're lucky enough to have some modern traffic signal infrastructure that has any of these systems, ATMS or ATSPM, that collects and stores detector data, then we're able to kind of go back in time and pull some of that information. Without that modern infrastructure, we can get crowdsourced data from services like INRIX or Streetlight that provide data based on cell phone tracking, basically. And then sometimes we're lucky enough to have a nearby or other study that was done recently where they have some recent counts that we can use. We'll go to the next slide, please. There are also policies for collecting current data and then determining whether or not or how to use that data. So, you know, it depends on the situation that's happening at the local level, if schools are in session, if they're in person. In some places, in some districts, schools might be in person on one day, not on another. So you want to make sure to do counts on the day that they are in person. You know, what's the situation with any lockdowns or business restrictions that are in place? Are businesses generally open or not? What are the, you know, capacity limits for restaurants, that kind of thing. And then, so once you take all that into account and decide when is the best time to collect data, you know, then it's a matter of, can you use that data outright, or do you need to look at and compare it to historical information and apply a factor to bring it to what might be considered more typical? The general approach has been to like establish a pre-pandemic trend and extend that through 2020 to estimate a situation where we don't have the pandemic. What would the traffic typically been? And then we'll use that as a starting point to then forecast future traffic growth using traditional methods like historical trends, but also travel demand forecasts that state DOTs or MPOs have. And with that, I want to talk about how we specifically applied this to one of our projects. Last year, we were tasked with updating a 2013 traffic study for a project in Southeast Michigan. That traffic study had collected turning movement count data at the study intersections in 2012. And we were going to simply go out in the spring of 2020, collect new data and update the traffic study, which would have been simple enough, but the pandemic put the kibosh on that. So we had to come up with a different plan, and working with our client and the reviewing agency, we determined or decided that we were going to use those 2012 turning movement counts and just adjust them to what we would have expected if we were able to count typical volumes in 2020. We had some historical data that we were able to use. We did have this corridor that we were looking at does have an adaptive traffic control system. So we were able to get that detector data from the traffic signals and make some comparisons to the 2012 traffic counts that we had. And that data gave us a sense of, the way that traffic was trending. But then we also looked at the ADTs and the counts that were available from the MPOs, the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, SEMCOG's website. And that's the chart you can see here. It shows some ADT information that they had from 2012 and some data points along the way as recently as 2018 and 2019, and then just looked at the trends, and these different colored lines are the different segments of the corridor that we were looking at. So you can see in some segments we saw a decrease in traffic from 2012 until just before the pandemic, and in other segments we saw an increase in traffic. And so we used those trends to establish, like I said, what we would expect turning movement counts at these study intersections to be if we were able to go out in 2020 and collect representative traffic volumes. Then, so we established the 2020 traffic for quote unquote existing conditions, and then forecasted a 20-year outlook to 2040 based on the MPO's travel demand model forecasts. We compared their 2020 model with their 2040 model. We looked at the specific traffic analysis zones along the corridor that we were studying that had information like number of housing units, population between the two models, as well as employment, number of jobs in 2020 versus 2040. And in this case, the model was showing that population along this corridor was not expected to change much at all over this 20-year time frame, but that the number of jobs were expected to increase from 2020 until 2040. So we used, because we typically look at commuter peak hours when we're looking at traffic, so we thought that the job forecast to 2040 would, help drive future traffic during those commuter peak hours. So we use that to develop our growth rates moving forward. But the one question, this is one example, and it's kind of typical of how we handled trying to move these studies forward in 2020. But now that we're in 2021, we're thinking about, when is traffic going to get back to quote unquote normal? Has it already gotten back to what is going to be normal moving forward? There's a lot of questions and a lot of study that needs to go into that. And I think, a lot of it is we're just going to find out as we move forward. But, this brings up what we're going to talk about next with looking forward to the future. But before we do that, we wanted to poll our audience and see what you think. If you think that what's going on, the traffic activity that is out there currently, is that are we in a new normal and we're going to go from here, or is there still room to rebound? So I'm going to try to put that poll up. And so if you believe that the current traffic volumes right now are the new normal, you can say yes. If not, you can say no. And I see a lot of people are already making their voices heard here.
You do have one question out there as well, Chuck.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and read that. I understand that you're forecasting from historical data, but how does this account for potential permanent changes to traffic flow after the pandemic? And that is a very good question, and what we're going to discuss next. And the problem is, I don't know that anyone really has a solid answer. So I'm going to go ahead and share these results. It seems like the vast majority of people think that we are not in a new normal yet. The things are still changing and evolving, and that we cannot probably go out right now and collect counts and say that, oh, this is what it is. So I think with that, I'm going to throw it back to Cindy to then talk about where we go from here. Cindy?
So moving forward, so the question that was brought up regarding traffic and future traffic is what we're about to discuss. And like Chuck said, the answers are pretty varied. So let's talk for a minute about why we drive, because that is going to inform the answer to the question, what is the new normal? How will we know when we get there? And then also what the participant asked as far as, are we expecting to see changes? And the answer to that is most certainly yes, we are expecting to see some changes from what was previously to what will be in the future. For instance, work. A number of people and a number of companies have determined that working from home is effective and efficient, and some of their employees can absolutely do that effectively. So going into the future, we are going to see a shift in how people decide where to work. And that can be as simple as working from home part of the time and therefore not adding to the AM and PM peak. It can mean that they're going into the office later in the day and maybe only being there part of the day. And also that means that while their trip is still happening, their trip is happening at a different time, which can impact the way we deal with traffic signals, the way we decide how much capacity our roads need. If the traffic isn't all happening at the same time anymore, then we can go forward and we can work that differently. Also, for those that are going to a fully remote working environment, they can actually live anywhere. So you don't have to live within a half an hour of your company maybe anymore, because it doesn't really matter where you live. You can work your job from anywhere. School, remote school, is that going to become a reality for more students moving forward? I believe that many students prefer to be in person, but it's possible that there were students that did better when they were working remote. Also, there was a shift in some areas more so than others to private or homeschooling. When the schools went remote, some people decided, well, the parochial school down the street is still in person, maybe I'm going to send my child there instead. So all of these things also impact where people are driving, when they're driving, and even if they're driving. And then post-secondary, same thing happened with colleges. Some people are in remote classes on campus. Some people are in remote classes at home. All of these students are of an age where they could drive, so they're driving where they live rather than where they're going to school. Impacts the capacity needed in areas as well, especially those towns that have low population during non-college times of the year, and then higher populations when college is in session. So another poll for everybody, and this is going to inform our discussion here as far as traffic volumes and how we individually impact traffic volumes. So I want you to take a moment and I want you to think back to April of 2020 and think about where you were working in April of 2020. So on April 1st of 2020, or any day in April of 2020, where were you working? Where did you spend your work day? So the poll has different answers available for you. It looks like we have quite a few answers at this time. Well, some people are still answering. Oh, I do just want, people are asking questions in the Q&A pod, and I thank you for that. Just want to remind you that Q&A pod is available for you to ask questions. Please go ahead and do so. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this poll. It looks like people have stopped answering. So more than 50% of us were working from home in April of 2020. And there were very few, well, actually, there were about 28% that said they were still working full-time in the office in April of 2020. There were very few that were doing any hybrid between the two. So now, this week, today, this month, where are you working? And just thinking about how it has changed. So as I see people answering, I'm just going to keep in my mind that the answers to the first poll were about 53% at home and about 28% working full-time in the office. And so I'm going to go ahead and share the results. So it looks like quite a few of us have begun to work back in the office full-time. So whereas it was 53% from home in April 2020, it's now only 28% from home. And then there are now 47% of us that are working full-time at the office compared to 28% in April of 2020. So you can see how, I mean, we're just a small sampling of all of those people that are working, but you can see if you take that and you take that forward to the entire population, you can see how it really impacts traffic numbers and traffic patterns that people are working from home or working in the office. Another large change is how we shopped, and how we shop really makes an impact. As the person that asked the question previously, it really makes an impact to traffic, and it's not passenger traffic it normally impacts, it is heavy vehicle commercial traffic. So previously, a lot of shopping was done in person at a store. We moved into the pandemic. There are options to order online and pick up at the store. There are options to order online and have it shipped from a local store. But a lot of us began to shop from centralized shopping sites. Not going to name it by name, but there are distribution centers that popped up and are still popping up all over the country. And those really changed the way that heavy truck traffic, how it traveled, and also how much of it traveled. I myself saw a caravan of new delivery vehicles from a certain online shopping site. And there were about 15 of them traveling along Interstate 70 from Maryland towards Ohio at one point during the pandemic. And it makes a difference in travel. And as far as what we look at for transportation, heavy vehicles are a little bit different than passenger vehicles. We need to design the pavement a little differently. So these things make a difference. And then another reason why we drive are free time activities. There was a great increase in people trying to be outdoors, be it eating outdoors or enjoying our parks, especially here in Ohio. Our national park enjoyed a great number of people that normally weren't there. So also free time, earlier closing times in Ohio. I know they did that for a while with bars and restaurants. They changed the closing times. And as we tried to narrow our exposure, we ended up spending a lot more time with just a few close friends or just some of our family. And I know a lot of us missed family and friends and plan to go back to larger gatherings soon, but there are some people that have maybe decided that that's going forward, how they're going to operate a little bit more. So how do all of these things inform our decisions going forward? What we have discovered is that data is important, and we will only know how this is impacting the future when we have more data. So as we track the work from home versus the work from the office, we are going to answer our own questions. And it's already begun to be answered. As we saw in our own poll, we are trending towards working more in the office. But it's happening slowly, and it's not going to be a complete change back to the office. The economic rebound that is occurring, some businesses have now closed forever. And going forward, there will be new businesses that take some of their place, as always happens when there is an economic downturn and then things get a little bit better. And that rebound, how quickly it happens, is going to determine how quickly we need to shift our traffic count and how much we need to put into those traffic forecasting growth rates. Population shifts. We're going to have to collect more data to determine if this new remote work is impacting the population, the shift to the suburbs, but even more so, the shift from large urban states to perhaps lower population states. Is that happening? Is that happening in a great enough number to actually change traffic significantly? So as I keep mentioning traffic counts, traffic volumes, these are important. This is information that we're going to have to keep collecting and keep using that in order to inform our decisions on growth rates. The way people travel has changed, the way people go to school has changed, and as we go forward and we take these traffic counts, we need to keep in mind the local school schedules, as we always have, local holidays, as we always have, and then use that data in order to make our informed decisions. So traffic forecasting, I know here in Ohio, they have already come forward, made the decision, made the statement that if traffic volumes are within 15% of pre-pandemic volumes, then we are to just use those numbers and go forward with them and forecast from there. It becomes a little bit more involved when the traffic numbers are not within the 15%. That's when we're getting into, well, we don't think traffic has rebounded quite enough at this location. And therefore, we're going to have to use some type of adjustment factor in order to really get a good starting point for what the traffic volumes are going to be in the future. So DOTs, MPOs are having differing approaches throughout the country. Like I said, I shared what ODOT's approach is currently. I have one local client that has told me, right now, whatever we count, that is our new normal, and we are going to use that, and we are going to apply a growth rate from there. So really discussing with the client what their idea is as far as what they're seeing as the changing environment in their local area, and definitely what we need to keep track of are the school situation, the business situation. Are all businesses back open? Are schools open? And then keeping in mind that right now, restaurants and stores and even places of worship sometimes have restrictions on the number of people that can be inside at a given time. And we won't know for sure how everything is changing until all of those restrictions are lifted. And then we can look at traffic and determine what the long-term changes will be and what we're going to see as far as further forecasting strategies. So with that, I am going to open it up to questions, and Chuck is going to be helping me with those. So going to the question and answer pod, if you could go ahead and ask any question that you have regarding what we've discussed so far today. And I do see one question here: how are current housing trends moving in suburban areas going to affect the future traffic pattern? And as I said, it is going to affect the future traffic pattern in that people who move to suburban areas and still need to be in the office are going to end up with larger travel times, going through more intersections, going through more roadways, and therefore traffic volumes in those areas will increase. However, if they're moving to suburban areas because they no longer need to be present in the office, then we're going to see a difference there as well. They're not going to be using the roadway systems at all. Chuck, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that's, in the Chicago area, we've seen rather dramatic exodus to the suburbs over the past year. And with the, just looking at the housing market, prices for purchasing homes, suburban homes, with, I think the general trend was that people are at home more, they're working from home, their kids are in school at home, they need more space. And so that was kind of what pushed a lot of people to think about moving from the city to the suburbs last year. And not just purchasing homes, but even the rental market in the suburbs has gone up significantly, because you can get a larger apartment in the suburbs than you can in the city. So that's definitely going to have a long-term impact, because even if over the next couple of years, everyone starts going back to the office like they used to, now they're living in different places than they did, 2-3 years prior. So like Cindy said, just, collecting that data, looking at those trends over time is the only way we're going to figure out what those long-term impacts are. The other thing we're seeing in the Chicago area is a steep reduction in, at least right now, the willingness of people to use public transportation, mainly because of the fear of the virus, catching the virus on a train or a bus. So hopefully, as vaccination rates increase and the pandemic just ends, people will feel more comfortable taking public transportation. But because of now the shift to the suburbs, it's just going to end up being less people who have that as a viable option to get to work, or that need it to get to work. So while we were focusing mainly on vehicular traffic, there's definitely going to be an impact to transit, and that's something that is also going to need to be studied. But I think in all areas right now, transit use is way down, and there's a lot of concern for the viability of transit networks in multiple cities in our areas. So I was wondering if anybody else have any questions or things they want to bring up. I don't see any others.
I would like to go back just for a moment and more specifically address the, for example, maybe there are higher traffic at intersections affected by online shopping distribution centers. And I covered it a little bit already, but I did want to point out that it has always been the case when we do traffic impact studies that a new development in an area, we take that, we look at what the development is, and we assign traffic trips to it. So new shopping distribution centers, new sites that are traffic generators are always taken into account when we do traffic distribution. So when you say, how does this impact it? It will definitely impact it, absolutely. And as they build more distribution centers, those will be more sites that are generating traffic in areas that weren't there before. And when you have enough of those in a certain geographic area, it will change the entire MPO's travel demand model. So that's something that we have discussed today, is the fact that going forward, assumptions that were made previously in travel demand models will need to be adjusted as new things happen and as we collect more data.
Cindy, the next question is talking about migration of people to downtown Cleveland and Akron apartments and condos. And since that's your neck of the woods, I thought I'd let you handle that.
So in general, what we've seen in the United States are people fleeing the urban areas because people are close together. They don't want to be that close to people. But this is absolutely correct that Akron and Cleveland have been pushing the apartment condo lifestyle, and recently sales have been up even in the urban area. So yes, this will impact traffic, just like we said with the flight to the suburbs. This will impact traffic as well. And the only way that we can account for that is by changing our trip generation. When you have more residential sites that are full in downtown, that would have to be added into the travel demand model. And anyone who's doing a traffic impact study should always and does usually look at things like what the availability of residential space is in a particular area, what the current vacancy rate is, and how many people are currently living there. So yes, it will definitely impact traffic, but it kind of depends how many people decide to live in the urban environment rather than in the suburban environment. And in different areas of the country, people are going to make different decisions about that. So we do have another question that has come in: with the loss in fuel tax revenue, what other revenue streams are being considered? Do you want to tackle that, Chuck?
I don't know that I have a good answer. I think a lot of municipalities and agencies are looking towards the federal government to fill those gaps in funding, and that's what all the discussion about this infrastructure package that they're talking about in Washington. I think that's why they seem to have a major push, and seemingly support for that is due to a lot of these local agencies having these funding gaps for their roadway projects. But I don't have specific information on what certain agencies are doing specifically. I don't know if you do, Cindy.
This has been an ongoing discussion for many years, as we have seen the beginnings of moving away from fossil fuels. This has been an ongoing discussion as we have more electric vehicles, as we have more vehicles that are using other fuel sources. We have begun the conversation: how are we going to fund our roadways if fuel tax revenue becomes somewhat irrelevant, or even less relevant than it is today? As right now we are fairly dependent still on fossil fuels to fuel our vehicles. So there have been many options put forth. One of them has always been somehow taxing people for the amount of miles they travel rather than the amount of fuel they use. That's been a discussion. Other things have come up as well with increasing the cost to license your vehicle and using that for fuel, for funding roadways. So it's already being discussed because of the whole fossil fuel issue. I haven't really heard any brand new discussion except for trying to get more money at the federal level. And with that, I'm not seeing any additional questions, so I'll give a last call for questions. Anybody else have a question they'd like to ask? Okay, well, I'd like to thank everybody for participating today. Thank you for answering the poll questions. Thank you for asking questions, and thank you for your attention. If you have additional questions, you can always go ahead and email myself or Chuck, and we will try to answer your questions. But most of all, just thank you for being here. Chuck, do you have any last words?
No, same thing. Thank you very much. Let us know if you have any questions or need any help on traffic data things as they come up on your projects. Thank you very much.
Okay. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks for attending.